Alrighty, so we're done with the visual layer and welcome to chapter number 4, where our focus will be exclusively on Flux. And in it, we're going to learn about the dispatcher, understand the Flux store, create our first action, and connect all the logic that we've weaved throughout this very theoretical chapter into an actual application that works as we fix a few bugs in the process of talking in theory. It's easy to have a few bugs. So let's jump right into it. And let's start with the dispatcher. Now, I want to introduce you the 3 key terms that we're going to repeat often throughout this chapter. The first one is the store. And the store itself, as the first theoretical building block, is really where your data sits. It's basically your repository, you could say. You're on the client side. It has some functions. Those functions are mainly there to retrieve data, but not to really manipulate data. Their main goal is to get you access to data. As such, when React needs something from a store, it would then load up the store that has the content that it needs and then use that content. The next layer is actions. And actions are, in many ways, the brains behind the data. You will use an action whenever you want to manipulate something, such as making a change to your data. And whenever you want to make a change, you're not going to call the store directly, but instead of that, you're going to call an action. And that action will then trigger an event. It will trigger, you could say, a few things that will happen down the line that will inevitably, in the end, make the store change. Actions, by the way, do not communicate with stores directly. Stores could call an action, but generally speaking, stores do not call actions either. And that leads us to our third type, which is dispatchers. And dispatchers are really, really empty. All they really do is facilitate communication between a store and an action, usually one way around. So when you're talking about an action, it will dispense a dispatchment, and the store would listen to it, kind of like a circle. And generally speaking, and this is throughout this title and throughout the whole development philosophy, is one-way communications. Our goal is to make communications between different elements of our application to be the most simple as possible. And the most simple possible is a one-way direction. Even if it adds more code, even if it adds some complexity sometimes, it reduces overall the complexity of your code. With that said, let's get started by seeing what the dispatcher is and setting a dispatcher up. Alrighty, so we laid the work really for this chapter. Everything comes to this. Our goal in this lecture is to basically set up our Flux into our React. And I want to kind of talk a little bit of theory. I'm not a big theory person, but I want to talk a little bit about why are we doing this. Now, it's true that we could put things in our state and our props, but there are 2 problems with that, and 2 real major problems that you might not notice them in the beginning when you're starting to work in React. But as you start building more complex applications, this is going to become obvious that something here is just not efficient. For one, your components are not supposed to communicate with each other. React's basic philosophy is that you want to have your flow going to the child. So parents talk to children, but children don't really and really shouldn't talk to parents. Now, sometimes you just have to, unless there's another solution, which is going to be Flux, which is going to help us in many situations to avoid the need for children to interact directly with their parents or other components for that matter. And the second really major problem is that our data is now intertwined. If our task needs something from this data of the tasks, it needs to go to its parent, and you're creating all this complex web structure, which really our goal is to minimize the amount of things that components are aware of and reduce the levels of communication to make it easier for us to isolate problems. If there's a problem in content, in data, we don't want to search for that data inside of our components. So in many ways, just like MVC is that model view control, if you've heard of that before, that concept of separating between your controllers, your views, and your modules, which is basically your data or your data logic, your visual logic, and your big picture logic, your controller, the thing that's controlling both of them. In the world of React, that doesn't exist. In the world of React, the React is the hero, it's in the center, the view is everything. But it builds a problem as well, and that problem is that where does our data live? And that's really the solution of Flux, the solution of many other technologies out there, of the idea of how do you extract that data and then communicate efficiently between your components only whenever they need access to that data. So without further ado, let's go ahead and start building out our Flux data structure, and I'm just going to call our directory Flux for that. So I'm just going to call it Flux. Now, our Flux directory is going to have two subdirectories. The first one is going to be called Actions, and actions will store all the things that are initiated that are not data. Those are basically the controllers of the data. In many ways, that's what, or it could be whenever we're requesting when we need new data to come in, when you want to add data in. This is going to be the place where we go to whenever we want to make specific actionable changes to our storage. On the contrary, whenever we want to actually just access it, that the name that I just said is storage. So I'm going to call this stores, and our stores are really where that storage is going to be held. Okay, so let's start from our actions. So for our actions purposes, really generally speaking, it's customary to separate everything into separate functions, as separate files for every function, for every action, just for the sake of visibility. But in our case, you could also set it based on types of content that are within. In our case, we're going to bundle everything into tasks, because that's really what we've been doing so far. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new file, and I'm going to call it tasks.js. Let's go ahead and save it. And I'm going to go ahead, and what I want to do inside of there, I'm going to start from the end. Now, what I want to do is I want to basically declare here an action. Now, I don't really know how to do that yet. We haven't done it yet, but we have a file. It's saved. On the contrary, so here we're going to have the actions, the requests for